Welcome to today's lecture on Mesopotamia, often referred to as the cradle of civilization. Situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia was home to some of the world's earliest cities, writing systems, legal codes, and organized religions. From the Sumerian city-states of and Uruk to the ziggurats and priest kings who governed them, Mesopotamian civilization laid many of the foundational elements of later cultures in the ancient Near East. However, this lecture is not only about the rise of Mesopotamian society, but also its subjugation and transformation under foreign rulers. We will examine how Mesopotamia's decentralized structure and internal rivalries made it vulnerable to external conquest. First, we'll explore the emergence of the Akkadian Empire under Sargon of Akkad, who unified the region through military conquest and established the world's first known empire. Then, we'll turn our attention to the Assyrian Empire, which came later but built an even larger and more militarized empire, using advanced siege techniques and an efficient bureaucracy to dominate the region. By the end of the lecture, you will understand how Mesopotamia's legacy lived on, even under the rule of these empires, and how conquest and cultural diffusion shaped the development of the ancient Near East. Mesopotamia's name comes from the ancient Greek word for the land between the rivers. That's a reference to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the twin sources of water for a region that lies mostly within the borders of modern-day Iraq, but also included parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. The presence of those rivers had a lot to do with why Mesopotamia developed complex societies and innovations, such as writing, elaborate architecture, and government bureaucracies. The regular flooding along the Tigris and the Euphrates made the land around them especially fertile and ideal for growing crops for food. That made it a prime spot for the Neolithic Revolution, also called the Agricultural Revolution, that began to take place almost 12,000 years ago. Climate shifts may have played a role in the development of Mesopotamian civilization. Roughly around 4000 BCE, the climates slowly became drier and the rivers more unpredictable. The marsh retreated from lower Mesopotamia, leaving behind settlements now surrounded by lands that needed to be irrigated, requiring added work and possibly greater coordination. Because they had to work harder and in a more organized fashion to survive, Mesopotamians gradually developed a more elaborate system of government. The bureaucratic apparatus that appeared first to manage the goods and people of the temples in the marshland cities increasingly became the tools of a royal power that found its justification in the support of the gods, but also in its ability to get things done. The people of Sumer, an early civilization in southern Mesopotamia, established the earliest city-states. Unlike other Mesopotamians, the Sumerians did not speak a Semitic language, the group of languages from which Hebrew and Arabic came. The origins of their language remain a mystery. By 3000 BCE, the Sumerians had created 12 independent city-states, including Uruk, Eridu, and which repeatedly battled each other for territory. By 2500 BCE, most of the cities had expanded to 20,000 residents or more. The rooms in Sumerians' mud brick houses surrounded open courts. Large homes had a dozen rooms or more. Sumerian city-states were prosperous. Their residents bartered grain, vegetable oil, woolens, and leather with one another, and they acquired metal, timber, and precious stones from foreign trade. The invention of the wheel for use on transport wagons around 3000 BCE strengthened the Mesopotamian economy. Traders traveled as far as India, where the cities of Indus civilization emerged around 2500 BCE. Two groups dominated the Sumerian economy. Religious officials controlled the temples, and ruling families controlled large farms and gangs of laborers. Some private households also became rich. Increasingly rigid forms of hierarchy evolved in Sumerian society. Slaves, owned by temple officials and by individuals, had the lowest status. People were enslaved by being captured in war, being born to slaves, voluntarily selling themselves or their children, usually to escape starvation, or being sold by their creditors when they could not repay loans, or debt slavery. Children whose parents dedicated them as slaves to the gods could rise to prominent positions in temple administration. In general, however, slaves existed in near total dependence on other people and were excluded from normal social relations. They usually worked without pay and lacked almost all legal rights. Considered as property, they could be bought, sold, beaten, or even killed by their masters. Slaves worked in domestic service, craft production, and farming, but historians dispute whether slaves or free laborers were more important to the economy. Free persons performed most government labor, paying their taxes with work rather than with money, which was measured in amounts of food or precious metal. Currency was not invented until much later. Although some owners liberated slaves in their wills and others allowed slaves to keep enough earnings to purchase their freedom, most slaves had little chance of becoming free. Hierarchy became so strong in Mesopotamian society that it led to monarchy, the political system that became the most widespread form of government in the ancient world. In a monarchy, the king was at the top of the hierarchy, like the ruler of the gods. His male descendants inherited his position. To display their exalted status, royal families lived in elaborate palaces that served as administrative centers and treasure houses. Archaeologists excavating royal graves in Uruk have revealed the ruler's dazzling riches, spectacular possessions crafted in gold, silver, and precious stones. These graves also have yielded grisly evidence of the top-ranking status of the king and queen, servants killed in care of their royal masters after death. Patriarchy, or domination by men in political, social, and economic life, already existed in Mesopotamian city-states, probably as an inheritance from the development of hierarchy in Paleolithic times. A Sumerian queen was respected because she was the king's wife and the mother of the royal children, but her husband held supreme power. The king formed a council of older men as his advisors, but he publicly acknowledged the gods as his rulers. This concept made the state a theocracy, government by gods, and gave priests and priestesses public influence. The king's greatest responsibility was to keep the gods happy and to defeat attacks from rival cities. The king collected taxes from the working population to support his family, court, palace, army, and officials. The kings, along with the priests of the large temples, regulated most of the economy in their kingdoms by controlling the exchange of food and goods between farmers and craft producers in a system known as a redistributive economy. The Ubed period is a prehistoric period of Mesopotamia. The Ubed people were the first known to develop a permanent settlement in southern Mesopotamia and founded its earliest cities. The Ubeds settled in villages. They lived in large houses made of clay with many rooms, which were big enough to house extended families. The Ubeds also created tools and pottery using fired clay. This was mostly done in the southern region of the area. In the north, the Ubeds may have used some metal to create these items. During this time period, from about 5000 to 4000 BCE, people began to settle in villages and create cities. The Ubeds began to develop farming techniques and domesticated animals for agricultural use. They developed advanced irrigation to help withstand the harsh environment. By producing surplus crops, they were able to support specialists in construction, leading to something entirely new in history, the building of central structures to serve religious, economic, and administrative functions. Thus, each settlement had such a temple, with priests acting as managers of the community's stored wealth. By the time farming villages had grown into the great Mesopotamian cities, both priests and secular leaders were involved in governing the increasingly complex society of a city. The secular leader was called the lugal, the strong man. With specialization of labor, people finding lots of different jobs and tasks to do other than farming work, it made sense to have priests fully involved in keeping the gods happy while the lugal oversaw running the city. Gradually, the lugal became a powerful king who dominated governance of the Mesopotamian city-state. While most of his duties as king were secular, the king had religious responsibilities as well. He, as well as the high priest, were an intermediary between the gods and the people. Kings participated in religious rituals. Common Mesopotamians considered the king as the representative of the city's patron god, the god's overseer on earth, so to speak. A king was expected to protect his city, to provide law, order, and justice, and to be a shepherd to the people, ensuring that widows and orphans were cared for. Kings formed dynasties, and leadership passed from father to son. Women, in general, were not involved in politics, but there are instances of women ruling a city. One example is Queen Kubaba, a tavern keeper who became the first female ruler in history in 2400 BCE. She ruled as queen regnant in her own right. In religion, Mesopotamians continued earlier traditions by practicing polytheism, worshipping many gods thought to control different aspects of life, including the weather, fertility, and war. People believed that their safety depended on the goodwill of the gods, and each city-state honored a deity as its special protector. To please the gods, city dwellers offered sacrifices and built ziggurats, temple towers, soaring as high as 10 stories. Mesopotamians believed that if human beings angered the gods, divinities such as the sky god, Enlil, and the goddess of love and war, Inanna, also called Ishtar, would punish them by sending disease, floods, famine, and defeats in war.